Hello, everybody. My name's Réal. I'm an Indigenous man from northern Saskatchewan. Before I begin, I just want to call everyone's attention to an issue that's going on in Canada right now, missing and murdered Indigenous women. So I think it fits with our topic here. And I just want to compel you all to action. And also, that action can be try and compel the government to action, not only the federal government, the provincial government. And action can take many forms. Maybe it'll be an inquiry. For me, I think the big solution here is education, mandatory education on the history of First Nation people, Métis and Aboriginal people across this country. And I think that'll help change the attitudes so that our first memories of Indigenous people are positive and not just having it at the post-secondary level, but all the way through. So, I like to talk, actually, when you first meet someone, the first memory, kind of going back to what I just said about what our first memory should be. I like having that discussion with people, the first memory. You know, it's a good icebreaker. And so sometimes it's hard for people to remember their first memory, but for me, I actually have deduced my first few memories, and it's about my sister, my oldest sister. And I figured out that I was probably about 3 years old when my first memories, and they're with her. And we had this big carpet, and I remember it being winter time, and we used to have little races around it. And I could walk at the time, but she couldn't walk, she could just crawl. So we'd have these crawling races around this big carpet. And I would always let her win. And maybe my mom told me to do that or something, because I'm a very competitive person, so I don't know how that happened. And so I remember having these interactions with her, and we were always playing, maybe going outside. But I also remember this one time when it was after Christmas. It must have been her first Christmas, so she just learned, she was still crawling, and so she was probably less than 1 year old. And I remember I got this big truck for Christmas, and it was like a semi-truck, and it had Safeway on the side of it. And I thought it was so cool. I used to play with this truck all the time. And one day I remember my sister wanted to play with it, but I didn't want to give it to her, and she started crying. And so my mom came in and compelled me to give my sister the truck, and I had to give her the truck. I don't remember what happened, but I remember there was no choice in this. There was no negotiating. I tried to negotiate it, that I kept the truck, but I ended up having to give it to my sister. And so she ended up getting the truck, and she was playing with it, and I was really mad. And I noticed my sister, she always had a soother, and I found her soother, and she didn't have it, and I picked it up, and I remember rubbing it on the ground, on the dirt, and I gave it to her. And I remember her taking the soother and smiling at me, and then not eating the soother, but putting the soother in her mouth. And she smiled at me afterwards, and she was quite satisfied. But she didn't know, like I duped her. And I felt good, okay, she has the truck, but she's got the dirty soother. So that's the life of being a big brother. And so then I also have these other memories. We moved to a different house. My mom was a teacher. And I guess around this time, they found out that my youngest sister, they didn't find out at first. We went sliding one day on this hill, and it was a huge, I thought it was a huge hill. I've gone by this hill several times, and it's not even really a hill. It's just kind of a flat ground. And because it's Saskatchewan, remember, right? We take anything to be any little slant is a hill. And so we went sliding there probably that same winter, and my sister started screaming, and my mom got really mad at her and said, and just kept taking her sliding, and didn't know why my sister was screaming so much. So then, my mom kind of had her motherly instinct and just felt like something was wrong. So she took her to the doctor, and they said ear infections. And ear infections have been a thing in my family. So okay, so she just had some sort of equilibrium. And it just kind of kept persisting that my sister, when we went sliding, she would scream, and my mom just didn't think it was just an ear infection. I ended up going to Saskatoon, which is a big city where they had the children's hospital. And finally she got a referral, and my sister, turns out she had cancer. And she had this rare form of cancer at the time that was, only like 2 or 3 kids had it. This was in the 80s, 80, 88. And so she got she passed away, and we'd go and visit her in the hospital, and I don't know what my parents were going through, but it must have been quite a journey for them. And eventually, I didn't really know what was going on. And she passed away, and I don't really remember that time period. And I do remember that her funeral. And it was a big funeral in my family, in my community, and everyone came out because they were so upset of how it had transpired. And eventually, I remember going up to see my sister in her coffin, and she had stuffed animals, her soother, and I just remember looking at her, and I didn't know why this was going on. I was about 4. She lasted about a year, and I didn't know why this was going on. And I'd look, I remember going up to her and just thinking, "Be strong." I don't know. It was like just something in my mind. And I looked at her, and then I looked back, and I remember starting to cry for some reason. I didn't know why. I just thought, this is my fault that this happened. And so I'd kind of just pinned that up. And luckily enough, but my parents, my other sister was born on March 4th. And my other sister, she passed away on March 15th. And so it's around this time, I say it's 25 years since she passed away. But so my sister passed away on March 15th, and our family dealt with this. My mom dealt with this. She took a job, an isolated place in northern Saskatchewan. And she says that was the worst thing, that she decided to go isolate herself after this happened. But eventually our life moved on, and I have 2 sisters, and Michaela and Martina, and I just got to see them in Vancouver. And it was great. I was actually on International Women's Day that I got to spend it with my sisters. And but the other thing I wanted to just kind of wrap up this story was didn't know why this was all happening. And the way I dealt with it, I guess at the time, was I became like very loving, compassionate towards my other sisters, and I wanted to always take care of them and make them laugh, and I guess that's just the way I dealt with it. And I remember one day when I was about 10 years old, we were always around the March 15th. We always say, "Beware of the Ides of March." And I didn't know why we said that at the time. I just knew that it was March 15th. And I read Shakespeare later on and found out about the whole Ides of March thing. So we always kind of say that every March 15th, "Beware of the Ides of March." And one year when I was about 10 years old, and we were saying, "Beware of the Ides of March." And we have a special dinner that night, and we set a plate for her. And that year I broke down, and I said, "Mom, it was my fault that she died." And my mom was like, "Well, what are you talking about?" And I still was 10 years old. I still didn't know why this cancer happened. And I said, "It was because of me. I put her soother on the ground, on the dirt, and it was me." And we started laughing. And she said, "No, son, that's not what causes cancer." And I was like, "Oh," I felt this big sigh of relief. And it was So my sister, even though she was only with us for just a short period, she taught me, that respect for women and just wanted to protect my sisters. And thank you.